Hi, I'm Don from DonDronesOn. If you want to fly a drone over 250 grams in Canada, you'll need your remotely piloted aircraft basic operations pilot certificate. Let's watch the video and get you ready for that exam. In Canada, drones such as quadcopters as well as RC aircraft are collectively called remotely piloted aircraft, or RPAs. For simplicity, I'll generally refer to RPAs as drones. The Transport Canada regulations for flying RPAs have been revised in 2025. This video and the accompanying PDF study guide aligns with the new regulations, although, frankly, there really hasn't been very much change for the basic operations certification level. Let's start by understanding how the regulations are structured. The regulatory framework is designed to address several tiers of risk. The riskier the operation, the more regulations and restrictions that apply. At the bottom of the heap, drones under 250 grams are considered very low risk and so have very few rules. Basic drone operations are those that remain within visual line of sight of the pilot, stay clear of people and aerodromes, and where the drone is less than 25 kilograms. Advanced operations are for flights a bit closer to people, in controlled airspace, and for potentially larger drones. More regulations apply, but you can fly in more places. Finally, there are regulations for flying beyond visual line of sight and for even more complex and riskier flights. Aligned with these tiers of operation are 3 levels of pilot certification: basic, advanced, and level 1 complex. You don't need a pilot certificate to fly drones under 250 grams. And for operations that fall outside the risk parameters for any of these tiers, you can always apply for a Special Flight Operations Certificate, or SFOC. While some people think these regulations are overly restrictive, another way to consider it is that you can actually fly a drone anywhere in Canada, as long as you have the right level of certification and authorization. I'll also mention at this point that it doesn't matter whether you intend to fly recreationally or for money. In Canada, the pilot certification levels are not related to whether or not you want to fly commercially, unlike in the US. The main risk parameters that Transport Canada focuses on are listed across the top of this chart. The weight of the drone, how close to bystanders you're flying near crowds of people, proximity to manned aircraft operations, and whether or not you can see your drone. Pilots with their basic certification can fly drones up to 25 kilograms, but need to stay at least 30 meters or 100 feet away from bystanders. You'll need an SFOC to fly at advertised events, which are things like sporting events or concerts. You need to stay well away from airports and heliports. I'll get into the details on that shortly. And something that is very restrictive around major cities, you need to stay outside of what's called controlled airspace. And you need to keep your drone within visual line of sight, what we call VLOS. If that works for what you have in mind for your drone flights, a basic pilot certificate will do. Otherwise, you'll need to consider going for an advanced or level 1 complex certification, both of which can be quite challenging to attain. Or you could stick to drones under 250 grams where very few restrictions are in place, as long as you're not reckless. Regardless of which pilot certificate you're striving for, they all start with an exam. The exams are online and open book, meaning you can have resource material open and can even use Google or AI tools to search for answers. This would be a good place to mention that I do sell the slide decks for this study guide video, as well as other study guides. These guides, in the form of PDFs, are very comprehensive and include links to other reference material. They also have links to dozens of videos I have produced to help drone pilots understand topics like VFR charts, the theory of flight, and stuff like site surveys. There are links to my free training portfolio and study guides in the description below this video. Okay, back to the story. While you can have things like study guides open, you do need to complete the exam on your own without help from anyone else. If you have a disability of some sort, contact Transport Canada to discuss accommodations that can be made. The exams are available in English or French and are multiple choice with 4 possible answers. Most questions are text only, but some may include diagrams. There's no penalty for wrong answers, so feel free to guess if you're totally baffled. You can't copy, video, or remove any portion of the exams, but you can keep notes of topics or terms you need to better understand. By the way, I have a few videos on my channel showing me taking the exams, but I've been careful to not show the questions and just paraphrase the topics. You might be interested in watching one of those to get a feel for the experience. When you submit your answers at the end of the exam, you will immediately get your results, whether you passed or failed. Unfortunately, the feedback you receive on wrong answers is limited to broad knowledge areas, not specifics, which can make it challenging to learn from your mistakes. But I'm sure you'll do fine on the basic exam, so don't worry too much about that right now. You can take the exam as many times as you need to, but you have to wait 24 hours between sessions and pay the fee each time. For the basic exam, there are 35 questions with a 65% pass rate. You have 90 minutes to complete the exam, and there's a $10 fee. You need to be at least 14 years old to hold a basic drone pilot certificate. As you can see here, the higher levels get tougher and require an in-person flight review after you pass the exam. For the basic, though, there is no flight review required. You're good to go immediately after passing. Incidentally, if you have any questions about this whole process, don't hesitate to reach out to me at DonDronesOn@gmail.com. Or better yet, join the Drone Pilot Association of Canada. It's free and offers great resources, as well as a Facebook community of thousands of drone pilots who are happy to help others like you. You're not alone. Okay, let's get into what you need to know to succeed at the basic exam. Your 35 exam questions will be randomly drawn from a large pool of questions that Transport Canada has come up with, but will always fall into these 8 knowledge areas, with the distribution of questions shown here. I'll go through each one to explain what you may be asked. And I may as well tell you now, you'll be surprised at how many of the questions appear to have little or nothing to do with flying a quadcopter drone. Many of the questions stem from manned aviation, fixed-wing RC aircraft topics, and aviation documents you may never have heard of. You could be asked what the cyclic control does on a helicopter, and you'll be expected to know, or at least be able to look up, weird, obscure weather terminology that can easily rattle you if you're not prepared. I can help you get through that stuff. All right, let's start with the first and largest knowledge area: air law, air traffic rules, and procedures. You can expect 14 questions from this area. They're likely going to throw a lot of terms at you in the questions, so you need to be aware of at least the most common ones, which we'll go through in a moment. You should also know the CARS, or Canadian Aviation Regulations, pretty much inside out. Well, mainly the drone stuff, which is in Part 9 of the CARS. I'll go through the fundamental ones in this video, but you should watch my whole series stepping through each rule in plain language. Finally, you should thoroughly understand the various classifications of airspace and aerodromes. Okay, I've got 5 pages of terms you should know. I'll speak to the important ones, but feel free to pause the video to read them all, or purchase the downloadable PDF of these slides and follow along with those, taking notes as you go. Totally optional, but I have to say the study guide PDF is a great resource to have. It's surprisingly important to know the formal definition of an RPA, as written here. You could be asked for that definition or asked a question related to part of it. Well, an RPA is the aircraft itself, including any payload that it's on board, like a camera, and RPAS is the whole system, including the controller. And they often ask questions about a small RPA. So you need to know that a small RPA is one that is between 250 grams and 25 kilograms. By the way, that weight includes the camera, prop guards if you have those, and perhaps fuel in the case of an RC aircraft. The next set of terms relate to people, and the most important one here is bystander. Several key rules refer to bystanders. people who are not involved in your drone operation and who have not accepted the risk of being close to the drone. Someone walking their dog nearby is a classic case of a bystander. With a basic pilot certificate, you need to stay at least 30 meters or 100 feet away from bystanders, but you can fly right over people who are part of your crew, including yourself as the pilot. A special case of bystanders is called an advertised event. An advertised event is formally defined as an outdoor event that is advertised to the general public, including a concert, festival, market, or sporting event. You'll need that special flight operations certificate I mentioned to fly at an advertised event, an SFOC. Visual line of sight is an important notion with some interesting nuances for the higher drone licenses. But for basic pilots, it's enough to know that you need to be able to see your aircraft with your unaided eyes. Okay, glasses or contact lenses are permitted, but if you can only see your drone with binoculars or via your controller or phone, you don't have it in VLOS. You need to be able to know where it is, see it well enough to control it, and be able to see incoming aircraft or hazards like towers or whatever in the area you're flying. Aerodromes. This is really important for understanding the rules. Aerodrome is the generic term for anywhere an aircraft lands or takes off. An airport is obviously an aerodrome, but so is a grocery store parking lot if an emergency helicopter is landing there, or a lake if there's a seaplane taking off. The most important permanent aerodromes are cataloged in a NAV Canada document called the CFS, or Canada Flight Supplement. There are actually 7 of these covering various regions. And then there's another document called the Canada Water Aerodrome Supplement for seaplane bases. In these listings, each aerodrome is classified as either registered, certified, or military. The terms airport or heliport are used only for certified aerodromes. The rules for each of these classifications are different, and we'll get to those in a second. Next, we need to understand some terms associated with airspace. Domestic airspace is all outdoors space above the ground within Canadian borders. Fun fact, all of these drone regulations apply only outside of buildings and above the surface. They don't apply indoors or underground. So if you want to go mental with your drone, find a local cave to fly in. Class G airspace is any airspace that is not Class A through F and is generally the wide open spaces that are best for drone flying. Controlled airspace is found around major airports managed by a control tower. These can be Class A, B, C, D, or E. It really doesn't matter which class because the rules for drones are the same. No fly zones for basic pilots. So if you live in a major city like Toronto or Edmonton, most of the city will be covered in a control zone, meaning you aren't allowed to fly your drone with only a basic license, even in your own backyard. Class F restricted airspace is designated around places like Parliament Hill, Niagara Falls, major prisons, and military testing areas. No-TAM, no-fly zones are temporary and are very important to know about because they can pop up anywhere due to a special event like an air show, an emergency situation like a wildfire, or a special police operation. So, with these terms in mind, let's go through the fundamental drone rules you should absolutely know, both for the exam and, of course, when you're actually flying. There are a few basic safety regulations that apply to all drones, including drones under 250 grams, like the DJI Mini 4 Pro. The most important one is what I call the "don't do anything stupid" rule. It basically says you cannot fly recklessly, endangering manned aircraft or people on the ground. You also need to stay out of emergency areas, such as a perimeter set up around a major accident. You need to stay 9.3 kilometers, that's 5 nautical miles, away from wildfires. And you have to stay out of temporary no-fly zones, the ones that are set up with no-TAMs. Drone registration rules are easy. All drones over 250 grams must be registered and have the registration number on them in an easily visible place. You need to be a Canadian citizen or permanent resident to register a drone. Foreign visitors need to go through that SFOC process I mentioned. To fly a drone over 250 grams, you need to have a pilot certificate and carry it with you when you're flying. You need to be fit to fly, including having no alcohol within 12 hours of your flight. To keep your pilot certification valid, you need to complete what is called a recency activity every 2 years. Basic and advanced drone pilots must keep their drone within visual line of sight, or VLOS, either within sight of the pilot or a trained visual observer. By the way, neither pilots nor spotters can be operating a vehicle or boat. Flying a drone using FPV goggles, which are considered to reduce situational awareness, is permitted only if you have a spotter helping you. Flying at night is perfectly fine as long as you have lights on your drone and you can see them. Basic pilots must stay 30 meters or 100 feet away from bystanders, measured horizontally. This measured horizontally thing can be imagined as an infinitely tall cylinder, 30 meters in radius. You can't fly inside that cylinder. Advanced drone pilots can fly closer, but to fly any size drone at an advertised event, where there may be crowds of bystanders, requires that good old SFOC. Now let's talk about proximity to manned aircraft and aerodromes, and this is where all those definitions will come in handy. First of all pilots of any size drone must stay away from manned aircraft. And if you happen to encounter a manned aircraft, the drone is the one that must get out of the way or yield to that manned aircraft. Always. And regardless of your pilot license level, you must have appropriate authorization to fly any drone in Class F restricted airspace, RPAS restricted airspace, or in a no-fly zone established via a NOTAM. Basic pilots are fairly restricted around aerodromes. You have to stay out of the flight paths near any registered aerodrome, the least active aerodromes, 5.6 kilometers, which is 3 nautical miles, away from certified aerodromes, and 1.9 kilometers, 1 nautical mile, away from certified heliports. Most hospital heliports are certified, by the way. You must also stay 5.6 kilometers away from any military aerodrome, whether that be a full airport or a heliport. And finally, and this is actually the biggest restriction, you need to stay out of controlled airspace. Incidentally, advanced pilots can fly in all of these areas if they are careful and have authorization. Here's a handy table that may make all of these rules easier to remember. I also recommend you watch my Aerodromes and Airspace video. It's in my free training roadmap. That video explains all of this stuff in much more detail, and the slides from that video are actually included in my basic study guide PDF. I should mention that while you may get exam questions related to these distances and keep-out zones, in practice, it's just too hard to figure out manually. When these rules came out in 2019, I worked with a talented developer to come up with Drone Pilot Canada, an app that makes it easy to know if you're in any of these no-fly zones and what you need to do to get authorization. There's also a website called the NRC Drone Site Selection Tool that helps, and the unfortunately difficult to use NavDrone app. Okay, one last page about regulations. Drones over 250 grams must remain below 122 meters or 400 feet as measured above ground level. The one exception is if you're flying close to a very large structure, say the CN Tower or a tall building. You can then fly 30 meters over the top of it, even if you're above that 122 meters. Finally, there are a few operational rules you need to follow. Before any flight, you must perform what is called a site survey, checking airspace-related issues, ground hazards, weather suitability, and potential proximity to bystanders. I have a video that explains all of this. You're expected to have and use checklists and procedures during your operation, including pre-flight checks, takeoff and landing procedures, and emergency procedures. You need to keep a log of all your flights and a maintenance log of any repairs or upgrades you've done to your drone. Again, the Drone Pilot Canada app helps you with all of these operational requirements. Okay, take a deep breath. That was knowledge area number 1 of 8, but the next 7 are a bit easier. Knowledge area number 2 is RPAS airframes, power plants, propulsion, and systems. Essentially the physical stuff that makes your drone or RC aircraft get off the ground. You can expect 2 questions from this area, but they can be doozies. For example, you need to know all sorts of peculiar bits and pieces of aircraft. My favorites are exam questions related to trim tabs or the helicopter collective control. One of my theory of flight videos covers all of this in detail. You'll also be expected to know about environmental factors that can affect equipment, how batteries behave, different types of motors such as brushless motors, and various components like a compass, IMU, or servos. I recommend you watch my How Drones Work video to understand that stuff. Knowledge area 3 is human factors, and some of these questions can be surprisingly challenging. Now, one easy topic that seems to come up a lot on the exams I've taken is related to being fit to fly. You'll need to remember that the rule is no alcohol 12 hours prior to flying a drone. I know, that's way more strict than driving a car, but that's the rule. And they also say 28 days for cannabis use. Other than fitness to fly, there's a broad range of topics that they like to ask you about the human factors area. I recommend you watch my human factors video for information about scanning techniques, perspective illusion, decision making, team dynamics, and many other tidbits that are not necessarily obvious or even easy to Google. Knowledge area 4 is meteorology or weather. The main rule here is that you are not legally allowed to fly outside of the specs for your drone, which usually boils down to temperature and wind resistance. The exam could ask you fairly simple questions related to the names of cloud formations or esoteric weather terms like rime ice. If you don't know these, a quick Google search will usually help you. Personally, I have found my understanding of turbulence to be sadly deficient, so you may want to study up on that. You could also see questions about aviation weather services available to manned aircraft pilots. You don't need to know the details about these, but you should be aware of basic ones, such as METARs. My weather video is a great resource for drone-related weather information. Knowledge area 5 is navigation, and you should expect 4 questions in this area. For sure, you could be asked about how far away you must stay from various types of aerodromes, as we've already discussed. They can also ask you questions related to aviation maps, such as VFR charts, things like latitude and longitude, or being able to understand different symbols shown on the charts. I have 3 pages of legends in my study guide PDF, and my VFR charts for drone pilots is a great video resource. Another topic they like to ask you about is interpreting CFS listings. They could show you a listing and ask things like the ICAO code for an airport, knowing if it is registered or certified, who to call to coordinate a flight, and an aerodrome's elevation above sea level. I have a video called How to Read CFS Charts that will help you with all of that. Because a lot of aviation information uses UTC time, also known as either Coordinated Universal Time, Zulu Time, or Greenwich Mean Time, you should be familiar with how to convert from UTC to a local time zone. The main thing to remember is that UTC time is based upon the Greenwich Meridian that runs through London, England. So all UTC times are earlier than time zones in Canada. If a time reference is 1100 UTC, for example, then you would subtract 4 hours to get 7 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Knowledge area 6 is flight operations and is quite important since you'll see 5 questions in this area. Again, you'll need to know about how to operate around aerodrome types, including recognizing that manned aircraft typically do a left-hand circuit around an airfield before landing. You may also need to know that drone pilots need checklists and procedures, and the fact that you need to do a site survey before every flight. Questions in this area may also ask about what records you're expected to keep, namely flight logs and maintenance records. You might also be asked when you are required to report incidents and accidents. Most minor incidents, such as crashing into a tree or even unintentionally hitting someone, do not need to be reported, but you're expected to keep a record of what happened and ensure corrective actions have taken place before resuming a flight. Now, more serious accidents must be reported to the Transportation Safety Board, specifically if your drone is over 25 kilograms, if someone is killed or seriously injured, or if you hit a manned aircraft. A report of a serious accident like this must be reported as soon as possible, but there is no prescribed time limit. Knowledge Area 7 is the theory of flight and can be challenging because it can be quite technical. Fortunately, I have a 3-part video series that covers a huge amount of information you may be asked about. This includes explaining the theory of lift, drag, yaw, pitch, roll, and airfoil terminology. One controversial area to understand is Bernoulli's principle. It's controversial because a lot of people think of it as the principle behind lift, but it isn't. Watch my video to understand. The final knowledge area is radiotelephony. Again, there can be some technically challenging or difficult questions in this area, but if you watch my 3-part video series on radio knowledge, you should be well prepared. That series covers the theoretical elements of radio transmission, when to use an aviation radio, and the etiquette expected on the radio. A lot of this stuff is outside the realm of the basic pilot, since you shouldn't be anywhere near an air traffic control tower, let alone talking to them on the radio. But you may still get questions in this area. At the very least, have the phonetic alphabet close at hand in case that's part of a question or an answer. Okay, that was a lot of information to pack into your brain. Let's close this off with some tips to help you ace the exam. First of all, in case I didn't mention this, watch all my videos listed in my free downloadable training roadmap. There's a link in the description below. And read the RPA chapter of the AIM document. It's only around 30 pages and really well written. When you're ready to do the exam, find a spot where you won't be interrupted for the hour and a half it might take. And use a PC or at least a tablet. Don't try this on your phone. Even on a PC, some of the diagrams and maps that they show are very tiny. Have your reference documents like the AIM open so you can immediately search them for terms or obscure items. Use Control F on a PC to search in a PDF document. Watch your time and just move on if you get stuck. But be sure to answer every question since there's no penalty for wrong answers. I recommend you have a sheet of paper handy to keep 3 lists. The first list is the question numbers for questions you are totally baffled by. These should be your first priority for going back and reviewing if you have time, and you almost certainly will have time. The second list are questions you think you got right, but maybe, less than 100% confident. Again, you can go back and review these later as your second priority. Finally, keep a running list of terms or acronyms or whatever you didn't know. This will help you to learn from your mistakes and your knowledge gaps if you didn't pass. Finally, envision success. You can do it. Be sure to let me know how you did in the comments below the video after you pass. So there you have it, the basic drone exam. What to expect and what you need to know in order to ace it. So get out there, take that exam, and good luck. Safe and happy flying.